Sometime this year, I was thinking about my strategy through life. And I've gotten myself to a position, exactly the kind of job that I was looking for. It's a higher paying job. I can work almost as many hours as I want to, while also not sacrificing going over the road and leaving Jenny for weeks at a time. I've gotten to the point, a good place in my life, and I'm always looking, what is my next move? Because I would like to do full-time production online through video, Biblecast, maybe personal videos, work in ministry. I don't want to work in the oil field the rest of my life. So I was thinking about this, I think early last year, about my dad's journey, moving around. His goal and mission was to become a full-time pastor. And I was thinking through I was curious, what was his thought processes when we were moving here or there, in his different strategies to get to that point where he is now as a full-time pastor. And that is where I wanted to have an interview and ask him. And then I thought, well, I could do a podcast, I could do a video. And then 3 weeks ago, Pastor Beatty had asked me to help him with the production for the Calvary Baptist in New Braunfels. One of my dilemmas was, how am I going to pull this off technically? I have a good microphone, I have recording software, I have some video, but I didn't think it was going to be good enough. So all this came together 3 weeks ago when he asked me, and so I thought this was a perfect opportunity to be useful in both my personal inquiries and for the ministry as well, and for others' questions that they might have. So here we are. And I've got 8 pages of questions. I was able to come up with these questions while loading water into a semi-truck, big tanker, and write out the questions, think about it, go over it, and 2 pages turned into 4 and 8. And I think I have the material, the questions that I want to cover. And that's where we are today. How would you describe your childhood?
It was pretty normal, suburban kid until my parents divorced in 1967, and then life changed quite a bit because Mom had to work a job. And then it was about a year later, she remarried my stepfather, Charles. My dad's name is Victor Warren Nutter Jr. And she married Charles St. John. And he was a fun guy to be around. He had he was an animal trainer, worked with some animals in some movies, Clarence Cross-Eyed Lion, Our Man Flint, a couple other bit parts where they needed animals, things like that. So he was kind of interesting to be around. But he was a drinker, and so he kind of warned me about alcohol, and saw that it basically destroyed his marriage to my mom. So then Mom kind of dated around and worked her job, and I went through junior high and high school, and so that's basically my childhood.
Okay. What was your favorite childhood memory?
Probably going to the Wisconsin Dells, with my mom and dad and Larry, my brother, and then we kind of a yearly thing, almost like we did with Camp Joy. That's kind of how I tried to recreate that whole thing, sort of.
Yeah.
Happy memories.
Any Christmas memories with the grandparents?
Not really with the grandparents. Both my grandmothers died before I was born, and then my grandfather on my dad's side, Victor Warren Nutter Sr., I was about 4 or 5 when he passed, so I don't have any holiday memories with him. My dad on my grandpa on my mom's side, You know, just kind of going over to his house. They lived over in Chicago, and nothing specific there, but you know, it was a happy time.
So your parents divorced, what age were you?
About 11.
11.
Mm-hmm.
And that was rare back then. It wasn't very common.
I only knew one other child, one other classmate that had divorced parents, and he lived with his dad. He was from his dad was from Czechoslovakia, and I didn't know the background on it, but there was only one out of hundreds probably
Yeah.
that I went to school with.
How has that impacted your life?
Well, at first it sounded cruel when somebody said this, that a divorce affects you more than if one of the parent dies, because if one of the parent dies, it's basically the end of that portion of your life. Whereas if you have divorce in your family, it kind of lingers on because you have that relationship and going between each sets of parents and everything like that. And so it had an effect into my adult life, and usually does.
What was your outlook at age 18?
Well, just kind of getting done with high school, and I wanted to start a cleaning business, and I'd done that. I'd done some of that and enjoyed it, but it wasn't something that was meant to be in the long term, even though I still like cleaning.
Mm-hmm. Why did you choose the Navy as opposed to any other military branch?
My mom had said that, you know, she'd said that you should join the Navy like your cousins on her side, that the Normandys had been in the Navy. My dad was Army. But it seemed like the training was there to be an electrician like my dad was. He made good money. And so I did that, and, you know, I actually lost my cleaning jobs, about half of them, almost the day after my mom said that. And
Wow.
so I was in the recruiter office within a day or two after that.
Why did you lose the jobs?
I don't really remember. It's just, you know, divine intervention.
Yeah,
Okay.
very, very interesting timing. How did you become an engineer? Was it electrical engineering was your job? in the Navy?
Electrician's mate. Just, I passed the aptitude for it and signed up for it in the Navy and went to school, and sent us out to the fleet, and there we were on the USS Incheon, electrician's mate.
How was that first cruise? Or what do you call it, a cruise?
Mhm.
Or how was that like?
Well, they flew us out to Rota, Spain, and the Incheon was already in the Mediterranean, and then we were kind of waiting for a point of where we could be flown to with some other people that were headed for the same ship, and they flew us to Genoa, Italy, and we met the ship there, and so it was quite a change. You know, it was kind of interesting from being from the Midwest. You saw a lot of green and trees and things like that, where it seemed like the southern Mediterranean area was a lot of rocks and mountains and everything, and after a while that got kind of boring, and I wanted to see green again.
How many were there of you recruits that went out there and flew out there?
Maybe half a dozen, you know, not all from the same, we didn't all have the same job or anything like that. So it was just a few people. There was another guy from Chicago, Herb Smith, I remember him. He was a black guy from Chicago. There was a Mormon guy, Kenny Hine, I think his name was, and Lieutenant Commander Cornelius, I think. And the other ones I didn't really know, you know, I didn't really get to know.
So after being in the Navy overseas, you came across the Christian. Can you
Right.
talk about that?
John Stump was in the same division I was. I was an electrician's mate. He was an IC-man, which is interior communications, phone lines, things like that. And he was telling me that I needed to be born again. And I said, John, that's what your church believes. I got my own beliefs. And he was giving me gospel tracts, and he got me a Bible, and I started reading it. and then could see that what he was telling me was in the Bible, that I needed to be born again. And what I thought about getting to heaven, which was trying to be a good person and everything like that, and obey the Ten Commandments, that that it says, not by works of righteousness, which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us. And for by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. There's a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. So it was pretty plain. God put it in the Bible pretty plainly that a person can't get to heaven by being a good person, by good works. But then I was kind of confronted with the idea that I didn't know if I could, number one, live the Christian life, and number two, didn't know that I really wanted to give up alcohol and drugs and partying and everything like that. But Scripture says, what shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? So January 13th, 1979, day before that, we'd left Norfolk, Virginia to go down to Morehead City, North Carolina, and pick up the Marines. I was the Inchon was a helicopter aircraft carrier, 600 feet long, about 87 feet wide. And so we picked up the Marines down there, and then we left to go to the Mediterranean. This was the second cruise. This was, 1979, January. And so it was that night in my bunk, I had got on my knees and asked the Lord Jesus to forgive me of my sins and save me. And not what I should be, but I'm not what I was.
So how did that change your outlook on life, your plans, what you were planning on doing?
God started speaking to my heart that really the most important thing I could do in my life was keep people out of hell. And so I thought that maybe I needed to do something besides. There was one of my shipmates that was going to Bible Institute in Virginia Beach, and so I was thinking about doing that, and then I ended up going to Hyles-Anderson College in Crown Point, Indiana, because they seemed like they emphasized leading people to Christ, and that was what I felt like God wanted me to do.
Okay. And you were how old at that point?
22.
22.
Mm-hmm.
So you end up going to Hyles-Anderson College.
Mm-hmm.
All right. First, how did you meet Mom? How did you?
Well, my dad and stepmom were attending Faith Baptist Church in Posen, and they had seen her and gave her a picture of me in my Navy uniform, and she felt like that's what she said to herself, this is the man I'm going to marry.
And then you got a picture of her in the mail in
Yeah.
the Navy?
Yeah, it wasn't too good of a picture, so I thought, I hope she's got a good personality, because she's not really that pretty, but when I met her, she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen.
Yeah. You met her at church?
Met her at church, yeah.
On your Navy leave?
Yes.
So you guys got married, and then you went to Hyles-Anderson College.
Yes, they at the time they'd allow students' wives to have one free class, and then I think we might have paid for one other one or something like that. But she got to do that a few different semesters. It was helpful to her, I think.
How would you describe your experience at Hyles-Anderson College? It was 5 years, 5.5 years.
Well, the bachelor's degree was 4 years, and then the master's education, I took that, and that was 1.5 years, but I attended summer school, so it ended up being a period of 5.5 years.
You guys were married 2 years before you had me.
Yes.
Okay, and who would you recommend Bible college to?
I think just about everybody for at least a year.
At least a year. After graduating college, what happened?
I was looking for a place of service. I sent out some resumes and did not really have any leads, except I was in the Navy Reserve at the time, and I was a little bit upset at God because at graduation people are talking about, where they're going to go, and I had nowhere to go. And so but I was in the Navy Reserve, and so I had orders to go to. Usually, I went up to Great Lakes and worked up there, kind of worked that and worked my cleaning job at the same time. And then this time, though, they sent me to. I had an opportunity to go to Hawaii, and they were going to fly us out there and then ride the ship back to California. But they sent me to Boston instead. So I was very disappointed. It was some consolation because I found out the guys who went to Hawaii, it rained, and it very rarely rains in Hawaii that time of year, I suppose. But ended up going to Boston. I had a copy of the Sword of the Lord newspaper, Christian newspaper, with me, and was looking for a place to go to church on Sunday, and I saw a New England Baptist church, and got on the public transportation, the T, I think they call it out there, and was looking to go to that. And I guess I got my geography a little mixed up, but when I called New England Baptist Church, there was a pastor at that church that said, well, you're basically not going to the right direction for me, but there's another church out there, New England Baptist of Brockton, Massachusetts. And so I ended up going there and got offered a job Sunday afternoon at the assistant pastor and principal's house.
Assistant pastor and principal?
Brother Jim Wilkes, yeah, he
Oh.
was the assistant there. Dr. Tom Ward, he was the pastor.
Okay, and when you were putting your resume in, what were you looking for? Applying?
Just to serve God someplace, somehow.
So it was open-ended.
Pretty much. They offered me to teach the 4th and 5th grade class, and so I felt that would be a good opportunity to start.
Were you hoping to become an assistant pastor then?
I think in the back of my mind, I was just wanting to serve God where He would see fit.
Why did you move back? You were there 2 years,
Right.
and what happened?
I just did not feel that the circumstances were lending themselves to what God had put in my heart to do. So I resigned after the second year.
And your mother passed away in that time, right?
Right. She passed away like less than a year after I'd left. She passed away January 31st, 1987.
Do you think that might have had something to do with you wanting to move back to Illinois?
I don't think so.
Okay. How did you find out about First Baptist in Burbank?
Let's see, I was at, when we came back, we attended Oak Forest Baptist Temple.
Oh, I remember
And
that.
Dr. Jim Dellishmet, who was the pastor of Faith Baptist, he was my pastor until he resigned, and Brother Bill Stedman took over. But he was attending Oak Forest Baptist Temple at that time, and he told me that Pastor Ron Auger at First Baptist Church of Burbank was looking for an assistant. And so I looked into that, and that's where God led us next.
Did you know whether it was a full-time or a part-time position?
It was full-time. Mom had at that time been with child, which was your sister Stacy. And but I was working a part-time job, and I had my health insurance, and we wanted to wait until Stacy was born, and so I kept that job. I was bivocational then, and then it didn't look like it was going to work where I was going to be full-time, and so I just kind of kept the bivocational job for about 5 years.
Okay. So the plan was you were going to do part-time for a while and then become a full-time assistant pastor?
That was the plan originally, but it didn't look like that's how God was leading.
You've told me of a story where you're coming back from work, you pull into the driveway, and you're overcome with sorrow because...
Oh, that was at Papa's house. That was at right after we moved back from Massachusetts.
Oh, okay. So that was... I got the timeline wrong on that. I imagined you pulling into the house there. So that was... After you come back from Massachusetts, you got that job. And okay, and that was a one-time thing where you felt like you're no longer in full or in ministry,
Right.
and now you're in a secular job,
Right.
something you were not wanting to do.
I didn't think it was going to happen that way.
Okay, and then you got that. At some point, you started candidating. You wanted to move away from First Baptist Church.
Mhm.
Actually, that time there was the highlight of my childhood. It really was. And you know, the rest of my childhood was fine too, but that was always like, that was the ideal, you
Mhm.
know. You started candidating. Why did you want to leave First Baptist?
It just seemed like that I wasn't going to be able to do what God had put in my heart to do.
And that was?
Win people to Christ, which I could do there. It just did not seem like it was going to be a good fit long term.
Okay. Did you want to become the pastor there at some point?
I didn't really feel capable of that. No, I didn't. I not of that church at that time.
So you candidated for a while. We went to different places.
Pennsylvania. We went to
Pennsylvania.
Sandy Lake, Pennsylvania, which was, I think, a suburb of Pittsburgh.
Some places in Illinois. As I remembered, it seemed like an entire year of candidating.
Maybe longer.
Yeah. But it was, we weren't easily accepted anywhere. And that always puzzled me because, you know, there's, you know, 5 of us. Maybe that was what it was. Maybe we were too large of a family that churches didn't want to take on, or I never understood why. It looked like there was a lot of churches that needed a pastor, but were reluctant and didn't want to accept you as the pastor. Why do you suppose that is?
The hand of God.
Yeah. Okay. So we end up moving to Oak Forest. Started going to State Road Baptist.
Donald Smith.
Oh, we went to Donald Smith Memorial Baptist
Right.
Church. Let's see. Donald Smith Memorial Baptist. Okay, so I've got that. We did that for a while. I remember that. I was
About 3 years.
okay. I was in your Sunday school class. I learned a lot about the tabernacle and a bunch of stuff. When I
You
visited,
and Sam.
yeah, when I visited Judy's church, and we went to the Sunday school, they just happened to be going over that topic, and I was, I told them all about the temple and everything. They were just awestruck, you know, that I knew so much about that, and that was because you had taught us that. And then, so at Donald Smith Memorial Baptist, did you hope to become the pastor there?
That was the plan. Pastor Shaw was going to transition out of that. He was sending out resumes and everything. Unfortunately, it didn't exactly go that way, and we ended up merging with State Road Baptist. Pastor Shaw ended up attending another church in the area, and we went to State Road for, I think, about a month, and I had already been sending out resumes, and we ended up at Faith Baptist Church in Melrose Park.
Okay, and you're the full-time pastor there,
Mm-hmm.
but you're still working. How long did you expect to be, you know, bivocational before you went full-time?
I was playing it by ear. There was a lot going on behind the scenes that you know, had to be settled and never really did get settled, and so I was just kind of getting, as we would say in the Navy, getting my sea legs. It
Okay.
means I'm kind of just kind of getting used to how everything's going and everything like that.
How was the church financially at that point?
I think they had about $30,000. I think they had about $30,000 in the bank. Was not doing bad financially, but it had been a troubled church, and so there was a bit of tumult that even though while I was going through it at the time, I didn't realize that God was using that church to prepare me for the church that we went to in Michigan, Calvary Baptist in Hillsdale.
So what tumult? It seemed like the attendance was pretty good, as I remember, And what happened there?
Well, there was some trouble in the church before I had gotten there. The previous pastor had left under some circumstances that were not the best. He was the son of the pastor before that, and so there was some accusations about some of the things that I had said or done, which were not true.
Hmm.
But when people want to believe something, sometimes they just tend to believe what they want to believe. And so I ended up resigning, and I remember the morning I resigned, I was driving to church thinking that I didn't really get in the ministry to do this. And so
To
I
deal with the
felt,
politics.
right, yeah. And so I felt really relieved on the way home that I'd signed resignation. I thought, I was amazed at how the burden just had fallen off my shoulders, just all the things and what we were going to do and how it was going to work out and everything like that. And so...
And that
yeah.
had been building over about 2 years? You were
No, we were only there for a year and 5 months.
A year and 5 months. And there were members, as I recall, that did not attend the church but started coming to the business meetings.
Right, at the right time.
At the
Or
right time.
The wrong time, depending on what side of the issues you were on.
So they were basically not active members, but because of some...
People that were there needed their vote on different things, and so it was just a lot of piddly things that we would. I remember we discussed whether we should buy a new copier or a used copier, and there was probably like 1 or 2 people there that actually knew anything about copiers, maybe 1 if that. And I thought it's kind of senseless. It seemed like it was more of a thing of people getting their way than getting a copier.
And when you suggested that the church you had the church buy waiters to do baptisms in, and there was a problem with that.
Yeah. Well, if
Did they bring it up at a business meeting?
among other things, yeah.
And what was their contention?
Well, that the previous pastors hadn't done it that way, and that they didn't do it that way in the Bible.
Oh, okay. So
Of course, they didn't have baptism tanks in the Bible either. So,
yeah.
but that's beside the point. It's about getting your way.
Oh, so waiters help you not have to change as many clothes.
Right.
So it's a very practical thing. How much did the waiters cost?
They were about $30 or $40.
And they had a problem.
I ended up buying them. I bought them from the church, so I had them at my next church. They didn't like them at my next church, so I gave them to Pastor Auger.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of small stuff they were picking on you.
Right.
And you think all this resentment towards you from this group of people, and not even all the church, just part of the church,
Right.
was that probably because of this whatever allegation they had, something you had said that they thought that you had said, somebody had spread a rumor around, or what?
Yeah, that's basically how Satan works.
Yeah, that blows my mind. So there was a confidence vote, and you won the confidence vote.
Only because I decided to vote for myself, and Mom decided to vote for us.
So you broke the tie.
Pretty much, yeah. It was close,
But you still decided to resign after that.
It was about another 5 months.
Oh, it was another 5 months.
Yeah.
Oh. And so those people were still causing trouble. What point was there a catalyst that you decided, I'm done with this?
Yeah, that morning on the way to church, I thought, I didn't get in the ministry to do this. So,
Do you remember what the circumstances were? That was on your mind at the time when you decided?
No, just kind of like, instead of wondering what God was wanting me and what he'd put on my heart to preach that morning, just wondering about who was going to be on whose side and, what, all that whole thing. And I thought, I don't think I want part of that.
If you could do the whole thing over again, is there anything you would do differently for that?
Probably plenty of things. I think that I just learned to get along a little bit better and go a little bit slower on some things.
Okay.
And, I feel like now it's almost like a game of chess because you can kind of like see ahead of time what something can lead to. Even though it seems like it's very innocent, it can lead to something that's, can cause a problem in the church.
Would you recommend church constitutions have an attendance requirement, or do you think, in order to prevent that case, or do you think that is such a unique case that most churches don't need to worry about it?
These days, the Christian Law Association recommends that you don't have active or inactive members, but that you take good attendance records and that you do require there to be, somewhat of some standard of attendance, and then if the people don't attend, then you're supposed to go to them and talk to them and try to work out any differences or anything like that. But then at some point they should be removed from the church roll, so things like that don't happen, because it's pretty common that people do that. That's how we are.
So after that, did we end up going back to State Road
We did.
for a while,
Mhm.
and then you were then you started putting your resume out there again?
I did.
All right,
Mhm.
and you were accepted a position at Grace Tabernacle Baptist in
Well,
Ohio?
before that, see, when we were at State Road, Pastor Campbell had resigned before we left Faith Baptist in Melrose. And then they had talked him into coming back, and he, as far as my understanding was, is that he agreed to stay. But he kind of confided in me that he was pretty sure he was going to leave.
Hmm.
And so that looked like an opportunity. And that kind of weighed in my decision to leave Faith Baptist in Melrose too, because, like I said, I didn't get in the ministry to do that.
Okay. What happened with State Road Baptist then?
Well, Pastor Campbell had at some point had decided to leave. I mean, we had, after we merged with Donald Smith, the Christian school that they had moved its operations over to the Donald Smith building in Oak Lawn, being right south of Burbank there. And I was still working my second shift job, had occasionally preached, led singing, cut grass, argued with Chuck Jr., stuff like that, Now we eventually got along okay, but when Pastor Campbell did resign, it became apparent that would not be a good fit for me to be there. And so I was on the pulpit committee, and along with, Chuck was on there, Mrs. Campbell, me, a guy named Denny, and a guy named Norbert. And the interesting thing was is that when we ended up calling a pastor, everybody on the pulpit committee was gone within 1 year. Even the Campbells, everybody. So
Wow.
just how God works.
And so you and Chuck would argue about what? Philosophy?
Just cut the grass, and
Oh.
who's going to cut the grass, and just things like that.
So maintenance stuff. Practical,
Some, and I think there was a little resentment there that I had the feeling that they didn't want me to be the pastor. So, which is fine. There were millions of other people that didn't want me to be their pastor too.
so now you get accepted at Grace Tabernacle?
Right. Well, first we candidated out at, I think it was First Baptist Church of Seymour, Iowa. And so when we went there, we actually stayed in Centerville. And then when we did not get the call there, I had looked on, I think I was getting a mailing. Back then, I don't know, we did a lot of emailing, but I'd seen on a list Grace Tabernacle was looking for a school administrator, and so I sent a resume, and we went back out there, and that's when God opened the door for us to go there.
And I was at an operational camp, or I was an operational staff at Camp Joy,
Joy,
Wisconsin, when
yeah.
I found out in a phone call that we're moving to Iowa. And at the time, I couldn't remember if it was Iowa or Ohio. I got those two mixed up. I remember people asking me, well, was it Iowa or Ohio? I don't know. But I remember the move, and we kids were excited. It was like a new start. It was something
Mhm.
interesting. I would say that my time in Centerville would have been my second favorite time growing up. And-
That was the plan.
Yeah. So did you see that an opportunity to become the pastor there at some point? Was that in the back of your mind when you accepted it, or?
The pastor toward the end of our time there had resigned, but it was explained to me that that opportunity wouldn't exist.
By a member in the church?
Yes.
Okay. So somebody in the church was not interested in giving you the opportunity to even candidate there.
Good way to put it.
Okay. So at that point, you decide to leave. Is it because they wanted to shut down the school, or?
I think the school was there for a year after we left, but I didn't feel like there was enough emphasis on the school, and we tried to promote it a lot. I traveled to other area churches within driving distance and with some promotional pamphlets about the school, but it didn't work, and so they ended up, after we left, that they closed it after a year.
They found somebody to replace it?
Well, if you remember, Mrs. Clark she was the certified teacher. In the state of Iowa, you had to have a certified teacher on the staff of the school. And so I was the one that wasn't certified, so I couldn't stay.
You weren't certified? Oh, okay. I
Right.
thought-
She was certified in the state of Iowa as a teacher,
Oh, okay.
where I wasn't.
So she pushed for official certification?
No. She was already certified. You
Okay.
had to be certified teacher to. You had to have a certified teacher on staff of a school that was not a public school.
Huh. And that's what led to the decision to leave
Yes.
for you? Okay, all right. So we moved back to...
Evangelist Billy Kelly used to say the good thing about getting fired is you don't have to pray about leaving.
Yeah. All right, and at that point, you decide to move to your old neighborhood,
Yes.
Spur Ridge,
Ridge.
and your hope was to start a church there?
Started church, was working got back to the school district where I was working before, working third shift and then substitute teaching during the day. And there was basically no energy left to do anything else.
So that's why the church never got started?
Basically, yeah.
And I remember the rent was really high.
Yeah, it was like about $1,200 a month, which was high back then.
It's high now. It's
Yeah.
higher than I'm paying for my whole
Yeah.
entire mortgage and taxes and insurance. Let's see. Under what circumstances would you recommend somebody starting a church?
Got to be sure that that's what God wants you to do. And, yeah.
Okay, all right. So after about a year and a half, or
After a
so-
year.
After a year,
Mhm.
you find out Calvary Baptist is looking for a church in Hillsdale,
Mhm.
Michigan, and you send your application,
Mhm.
and they have you come preach. How many times did you preach there before they accepted?
I'll bet you 3 or 4. We went out there, I know, beginning of June in, I think 2003. And then they called me July 6, 2003.
How long would you recommend somebody candidate at a church before they accept a pastorate there?
I guess there's a textbook answer, but definitely seeking the leading of the Lord as far as the impressions you get about everything. Get counsel from other pastors that had been down the road a little bit and maybe in the same type situation. But getting counsel is very important.
Calvary Baptist had been without a pastor for about a year and a half,
I think about a year and a half.
and there was at least a member there that was used to leading the church. He kind of filled the leadership vacuum there for a while. Do you think it was difficult for him to relinquish that leadership role?
It's kind of common in churches for them to, and even sometimes that even leads to them being without a pastor for a while because, well, they don't have to pay for a pastor now, and they get to hear a variety of people and they hold the power as far as everything in the church going on. And so when a pastor comes, they need the grace of God to relinquish that, but sometimes they want to hang on to some of it, and there's conflict.
Have you seen that as a problem in most of the churches that you've pastored?
Except for the one I'm in now. Yeah.
Okay, so that has been a common
It's human nature.
struggle.
It's human
Yeah.
nature. People, when they call a pastor, they have an idea about what they think it's going to be like, and sometimes it's not exactly like they imagined, and so they will try to steer, in any relationship. I guess we do that.
When did you start noticing a problem?
Probably about 6 months or so in, which was common. After 6 months, they say that about a third of the people, some people will leave, some people will stay, some people will stay and oppose you, so.
So that's usually the honeymoon period.
Yeah.
About
Yeah.
6 months.
Yeah.
So after that, I had been activated to go overseas, and while I was gone, and I felt like there was a housing allowance that I was able to obtain, and I didn't feel like I should keep that. And since my stuff was at my parents' house, I just sent them the money. It was like $400 a month or something like that.
Yeah.
And there were strategies implemented to encourage you to move on from the church. About
Right.
a year to a year and a half in?
Yeah, after a while, I think it was actually after they had some savings, but it was kind of like putting a CD or something like that, so you couldn't really draw on that. And I mean, eventually we ended up spending it to pave that section in the front of the church. And so it's a kind of a common strategy to start playing games with the offerings and designate the money isn't going to the general fund, we'll designate it to something else so that we all of a sudden don't have any money to pay the pastor. And so that kind of puts a lot of pressure on a family.
One of the tactics, one of the things that happened was the air conditioner was fixed in the van.
Oh yeah,
in the middle of the winter,
in the
when it's 30
wintertime,
degrees.
February. I thought that's kind of odd that we would pay for that then when we aren't needing it until later on. So it became obvious that, and then when you look at some more of the spending and everything like that, that money was being spent at a time when it wasn't really necessary to spend it in that area. And so, I knew that something was up.
Would you suggest candidates look for, or what would you suggest they look for when they're visiting the churches? How do they find the history, maybe sense all that out?
Look very carefully at the statement of faith, the Constitution. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be too eager to accept the position.
Okay. Should someone seeking the pastorate become an assistant pastor first for a while?
I think so.
Did that help you prepare to become pastor?
It
being
did.
at First Baptist?
It did.
Okay.
Even some of the places were, probably every place we were, I know that God used, and in certain situations I could feel myself almost like going into the mode of being like Pastor Auger. How would he handle the situation? And I would not really purposely, but just kind of like almost just going into that mode because this is how he would handle this is what he would say, this is how he would stand, not really trying to mimic him, but just I learned a lot from him and really all the pastors I was under in different things. Pastor Pick, I learned a lot under him in Iowa, just about managing your time and how you handle things and everything like that.
I remember one thing you had shared with me about Pastor Pick is he looked at the finances as every expense was the tithe on 10 times that.
Yeah, if you're spending $10, that's tithe on $100,
Yeah.
And that's why when we were talking about different expenses, if they kick up the telephone $10, well, that's somebody's tithe,
Yeah.
and so you got to kind of basically fight for that.
Yeah. How old should someone be before they think about pastoring?
Not too many in their 20s,
Okay. So probably 30 or older.
Well, that's when Jesus started his ministry, so.
That's a good answer. What books would you recommend for young or new pastors?
Lectures to My Students by Charles Spurgeon. The Disciplined Life by, I think it was Richard Taylor. The Kneeling Christian by The Unknown Christian. Some other ones that have helped. They don't come to my mind right now.
I noticed you didn't say the Bible, so.
That's
Just kidding.
assumed, all right? The
I'm just
King
kidding.
James Bible,
Yeah.
all right?
All right. Are there any community connections, something that you think would be helpful for them to get connected to?
I try to, not as much these days but in Hillsdale I would try to go to school events sometimes and just be involved in the community as best as possible. When people you're trying to help, if they got to go to court with them, just different things, try to be with them when somebody dies, visit them in the hospital, just be out in the community and meet people.
Is there an associate of pastors that you are aware of that you could connect to?
We're kind of cliquey, I guess, where we went to school.
Okay.
Maybe more than we should.
Mm.
But like good books, you can't associate with everything, just like you can't read every book that's good.
Mm.
So a lot of it comes down to the leading of the Lord about what we would, what He would have us to do, and use our time and our treasure and our talent.
Hmm. So after, what was the timeline of the the challengers, the resistance at Calvary Baptist? They left it about 2 years or 3 years in. They finally left.
Might have been a little more than that. 'Cause it was, might have been like 4 years.
4 years. Okay. I remember that, and I was unaware when I was in Afghanistan that there was anything. So that was kind of a a divine thing when it came to helping you guys financially. And then Sam.
It was real divine.
Yeah.
It was real divine.
Yeah, because I was completely unaware. I didn't do that for any other reason than I just felt like this money does not belong to me, and I'm getting able to let my stuff be stored there, so I let you guys have it.
One Christmas, I think we missed at least two paychecks, maybe 3. Around Christmas time, which is really
Wow.
rough with family.
I
It was at least 1 or 2. Might not have been 3. It might have seemed like 3.
I remember Sam decided to join the Navy, and he was going to get a sizable bonus, and he let the resistance know that I had helped you through the last time, and he was fully prepared to use all those funds to help you continue.
Mm-hmm.
And soon thereafter, they gave up and left.
Well, like I said, the experience from the first church is what really helped me a lot. God used it a lot to help me to figure out the path forward. Back on what you were saying about something, we're missing something. I forget what I was going to say. But, oh, when, no, I'm not thinking of what it is.
Okay. Looking back, you were the longest serving pastor, almost double of the other pastor?
Pastor Boylett had stayed there 6 years. We were there 11 years and 5 months. 11 years and 6 months, I think it is.
You won politically against the resistance. You went on to have the most baptisms in any one year, and probably...
That I could tell in the records. The church had run more people under Pastor Frizzell and Pastor Boylett, I guess. But I wasn't able to find in the records where we'd baptized more than 20.
Yeah. And you were able to leave the church with a successor who's been there 4 years, Sam.
Coming up on 4 years, yeah.
Your second born.
My second favorite son.
Second favorite. What made you decide to leave there after all that?
I think you were with me. You and Sam were with me. We were at a White Castle in Northwest Indiana, and there was a Navy recruiter there, and I started talking with him, and started talking about the chaplaincy, and so got interested in that, and did the paperwork for that for the Navy and the National Guard. National Guard seemed like it would be easier to get in, and so I did that paperwork and took the physical, and was looking at becoming a chaplain in the military. But they, at the time, they had changed the age. They'd upped it some. There were some other issues, I suppose, that basically God didn't want me in there. And looking back on it, I can see that that's what he had in mind. But from that, what I ended up doing was getting an interest in becoming a hospital chaplain, which when I applied for some training at Loyola University Medical Center, where I got accepted into the CPE Clinical Pastoral Education Program, which is something that chaplains go through. And one of the students there described he had been a doctor and had decided to go into the ministry as a Catholic priest after his wife had died, and he described kind of like being there and starting a new area of ministry as being on a first date.
Oh, yeah.
And that's kind of what it was like. It was like, just something that I really fell in love with doing, and humanly speaking, wish that I would have kind of gone in that direction earlier. But, God has his reasons and his ways. And so when I was looking at leaving Calvary in Hillsdale, I was looking to either be a chaplain resident or a job as a chaplain. I went to a pastor's meeting at a tent in Tinley Park at Calvary Baptist, and one of the pastors there said, "I know 5 churches that are looking for pastors. Are you interested?" And I said, "No, I'm not interested." And one of them was Welcome Hill in Lamont, so I thought, well, I'll send one resume and see how that, because I'd always heard that was a good church. My friend Jim Velasquez had pastored there for about 3 years, and so ended up candidating there, and God opened the door for us to go there. Sam stayed in Hillsdale, but it didn't turn out to be as good a fit as I was hoping for, and there was some misunderstandings. They're good people. We still go back and see them on their homecoming in August. Been back there every year since. But it just was not a good fit. And as you know, I started work. There was a guy in the church that had a printing ministry, printing business, not a ministry, sort of ministry. But so he offered me a job while working there. While I'd resigned, the church had given me 10 weeks severance pay, and so I was working in the print shop, packing pizza menus and boxes and things like that. Mom was over living in Indiana with Bob and Dottie, who Dottie had been sick, and was to pass away within a few months of that. I lived at First Baptist in Burbank at the guest house there while I was at the print shop, and then would go be with Mom on the weekends. In the meantime, I was candidating at a small church in New Chicago, which is by Hobart, Indiana. Their pastor had just resigned and actually ended up passing away after he'd resigned. And I candidated there. I was in the process of candidating there, but God had opened the door to preach at First Baptist Church of Crete, Illinois. And but it really seemed like it would be a good fit there. But I was candidating at First Baptist New Chicago. And as you've probably heard me say before, I felt like I was engaged to one gal but in love with another gal, which was kind of strange.
Oh.
And so Mom had she'd gone to either Tennessee or Florida with Sharon Sherrill. And that was planned. And so when I went to preach there just to fill the pulpit, we felt like, well, if it was meant to be, that God would open the door. And so when I went there to preach, one of the I think it was probably the first or second time I was there, I was supposed to spend the night in the parsonage, but it didn't seem like from what I remember, they'd already had somebody in mind that they were going to candidate, and I should have learned, but I didn't. It's been a few times in between, but being upset at God doesn't pay, and God always knows what He's doing. And the Lord, I was so disgusted, I didn't even spend the night in the parsonage. I says, I'm out of here. I didn't want any part of being there because I didn't like how it looked like it was all coming down. But as it turned out, the church in New Chicago didn't call me. And we candidated at First Baptist Church of Crete. And the Lord called us there.
So after college, you moved to Massachusetts, then back to Illinois. Then to Iowa, back to Illinois, then to Michigan, back to Illinois. Not moving quite as far away from Illinois each time. Each time was closer. It seems like there's a tug of war between home and adventure here. What do you?
Home and adventure?
Yeah, so they're going to a new land and then returning home.
The next adventure is Memory Lane. Okay, that's the next adventure. Yeah.
So you plan on staying in Illinois?
Till God moves somehow. I don't plan on leaving anytime soon, but God has His ways of letting you know what He wants you to do, and you better do it.
And how is things going at First Baptist Crete?
Going well. The budget's good. I kind of hesitate to tell folks that the offerings are $200 above what they'd need to be, because you're thinking, well, people are going to stop giving. You don't want that.
Yeah, you don't want to announce that.
You don't want to, but people should be commended for their giving, and I try to do that. They're really good givers for a small church. We only average, I think this last quarter we've averaged around 40 to 42. Been down the last two Sundays. We had a Sunday where we had 61. That was the most that we'd had in 6.5 years at that church. So there's ups and downs, and usually I've kind of learned that people don't usually show up because of the pastor, and people usually don't stay home because of the pastor. So it's, in a sense, it's God's blessing, but you shouldn't take it too personal if they don't show up, and you shouldn't let your head swell if they all show up on one Sunday.
So it's time to vote the pastor a raise, then, it sounds like, huh?
Well, it's going to be a change of circumstances, because we're going to be kind of transitioning into partial retirement.
Okay, Social Security and all that. You were the firstborn as Brian Victor Nutter. Your dad was the firstborn as Victor Warren Nutter Jr., his father also the firstborn as Senior. I'm the firstborn as Scott Stephen Nutter. What happened?
Mom wouldn't go for any of those names. either Victor Warren Nutter or Brian Victor Nutter. So
okay.
Took 2 tries to get Sam, so.
Yeah.
But because I wanted to name you Sam, but she didn't go for that at that time. And so I had a friend from Faith Baptist in Posen that seemed like a pretty good Christian guy. His first name was Scott, and I had a cousin have a cousin named Scott, and so I thought I'd run that name by Mom, and she was okay with it.
And where did Stephen come from?
I wanted a Bible name. And Stephen was the first martyr of the Christian church.
Who got stoned?
Who got stoned?
With a
died
PH?
Died for the faith. Yeah. Well, I think that's the way
Stephen
we
with a
spelled it, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you found out Mom was pregnant with the second child, and you wanted another boy, and she wanted a girl, and when you found out it was a boy, you named him Samuel, which means asked of God, then gave him the family name Victor for his middle name. Two meaningful names, and mine have some meaning, but seem less significant. But he has since followed very closely in your footsteps. He joined the Navy, like you have joined the Navy. He became assistant pastor at First Baptist Church, like you had, exactly like you had. And he has since been the successor as pastor at Calvary Baptist in Hillsdale. It looks like he got the inheritance, the blessing, so to speak, while I moved to Texas and became a truck driver in the oil field. How do you measure the success of such two different outcomes?
If the person is living for God, walking with God in their Bible, praying, evangelizing, being a good husband, a good wife, if that be the case, that's how success is measured. I can't make the decisions for you. Just like my dad couldn't make my decisions for me or my mom. You each have to walk with God, make your own decisions, and I have to trust that as long as you're doing those things, the decisions you make are within God's will, and also have to figure that God is going to allow you to make some decisions that I'm not going to necessarily agree with. But I have to trust that He will deal with you if you're wrong and bless you if you're right.
Did you hope that maybe both of your sons would become pastors or full-time ministry, or did you have any?
Yeah, I think so, but I don't feel like you've disappointed me. You're at least as good a preacher as I am. At least last time I heard you.
Mm-hmm.
Sam is better, but. Better than both of us, but I can clean my room better than he can, so and organize my office. But Sam's pretty gifted, but you've got your gifts as well, and if you're taking the path that you feel like God wants you to take, and that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I don't feel called to become a pastor. I know I could do the job. I am more equipped.
It's more than preaching.
Yeah.
It's a lot more than preaching.
Yeah. And God has worked in my life to be a little less narcissistic, a lot less narcissistic than I used to be. I'm more of a people person than I used to be. So I know I could do the job better, but I feel called to do some more work online. In producing. I can reach more people that way, or at least help in that aspect. So that's where I am in a type of evangelism, as I see it, and Sam has walked in that. So I'm still working toward that, like you had been working toward where you're at, and I hope to get there as soon as possible. But I've accepted where I'm at. I've accepted doing the job as long as it takes as a truck driver before I can move on. And I feel like God will open those doors when it's time. It used to be that I've been mad at God before. Like, God, you know what I'm able to do.
You think we'd learn.
Yeah. It is good for us to realize, God knows what we're capable of. And there's a timing aspect when we're going to be right for that. Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years.
Yeah.
The greatest leader in Hebrew history other than Christ. And God chose to let him ripen in the desert. And David had to wait a long time before he was king.
Mhm.
There's a lot of waiting, and it looks like there was a lot of that in your life as well. You were officially full-time, but you still worked the first time only for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like to me it was a weird timing that soon as I went to college, you got a pastorate and pastored that for over 10 years. It was like God was waiting for me to go to college before he had you do that, or till he was waiting for Sam to be a certain age or something. You know, we try to put meaning on the timing of things retrospectively, and I don't know, it doesn't bother me. It just it's one of those things that is interesting, because that's what I felt that you wanted to do a lot early on. And you know, you were a custodian for 10 years?
12 altogether.
12 altogether.
Felt so good to leave, I left twice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I did with the Army. I left twice. But so that's where we are, and I'm so glad we were able to do this. It worked out very well.
I'd encourage you, Scott, to enjoy. Don't focus. I mean, we should focus on the destination where we think God wants us to go, but always try to enjoy where you are right now.
Everybody tells me, look, you're still young, you know, don't worry about it. You've got plenty of years ahead of you. And I just don't feel comfortable accepting that view on life. I live with a sense of urgency, but I also do realize that I should enjoy life now.
Right.
So it's a real struggle for me to not get too comfortable where I am, but also not be so anxious that I make unnecessary decisions to try to push forward. And that's where I'm at now. And early last year, almost a year ago in January, I came to the conclusion that I am supposed to enjoy my life right now and not try to figure out what is the next step for me. And I think that is still for another year, to really just settle in and wait on God opening opportunities, or
Right.
you know, for me. And that's where I am right now.
I
And
wouldn't try to force anything.
well, within this year, I call it Resolution 2.0 because by July, you know, I had pretty much done what I wanted to do with my resolution in January, and that was building relationships and people. So I focused on getting to know people, every stranger at work, finding out their name, and building relationships that way, and people, focusing on building them up, not criticizing them. And when I find myself criticizing somebody at work or hearing about them, I always try to find something good about that person, and it's not hard. Everybody has pros and cons to their personality, and I would reinforce that. So that's why I moved on in July, a little bit later than I wanted. June would be perfect, it's 6 months, but my resolution was nurturing body and spirit. And so I've been focusing on doing a little more exercise, and a lot has changed since then. On day shift, we moved to a church in Seguin, and I was able to get weekends off instead of Tuesday and Wednesday. So it looks like things have opened up for me to be more involved in church. I lead the singing in church. I'm part of the finance committee. I was able to be a pastor. Beatty had asked me to help with the production here at whatever capacity. I'm excited to be able to do that. And so a lot of things have opened up that bring more meaning to my life as opposed to just being a truck driver. And I think that it has really filled my plate. My prayer a few months ago and longer was, God, give me something that I can just put myself into.
Yeah.
Because a year ago, I am studying Hebrew and just obsessing over Genesis 1, and that was my thing for 18 months and still is on and off. Just every word, re-looking at it, and it's been my project, but it has really slowed my ability to do Biblecast because a lot of thought goes into that. And I wanted to move on, but if I could spend time in other scriptures, I have time for that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I started doing more on Nuttertainment, just posting stuff, getting used to putting productions on there, thoughts about economics or different aspects of my life, just so I get used to producing things. And right now, my main thing that is holding me back from producing more on Biblecast is really getting a Bible out there while the truck is loading, scripture, printing it out. Now I should be able to print things out. I got a new printer and stuff. And putting together lessons for Biblecast, and then recording and editing is the easy part. It's, and I've got a lot of material up here that I just have to organize and put in, and that's where I'm at. And I expect next year to do more in that way. But I'm glad we were able to do this, and this is
One of the benefits, though, of being a full-time pastor is that you have to, I know I was recently talking with Brother Chuck Coffey, who was an evangelist for many years and was my first Sunday school teacher when I got saved in Virginia Beach for Tabernacle Baptist Church out there, and he was my first Sunday school teacher. Kind of taught a new believers class, and he said that Brother Bell, who was the pastor out there, had basically every day he would go from about 8 a.m. until like I guess noon or 1, and he wasn't to get it. He told the secretary no phone calls, no interruptions, no anything like that, and use that time to spend studying, praying, reading, and just being with God. Because when you're, I guess even especially like bivocational, you got so many irons in the fire. Somebody who is talented, probably the downfall of being talented is that you could probably get away with your talent and not, I don't feel I have a special talent for teaching or preaching, even though I think I can do it and do it somewhat successfully. But I understand that if I don't have that time with God, I'm going to fall flat on my face. My words are going to fall to the ground. It's not going to amount to anything. And I can have confidence in the future because I'm spending time with God. I'm in His Word. I'm praying. I'm praying for my family, the church members, our country. And so I'm doing my part. And if things don't turn out the way that I would hope they would turn out, at least I did my part, and I can be confident that God is going to use it, whether it turns out the way I hope or not.
all right. I think that concludes our interview or interrogation, however you want to view it, and we can cut.